For as long as I can remember, the abandoned school near my house has been nothing more than a forgotten relic, a crumbling building with broken windows, rusting gates, and graffiti-covered walls. It just sat there, silent and empty, like a black hole in the middle of our neighborhood. No one ever went near it, not kids, not teenagers, not even the bravest souls looking for a thrill. Growing up, I heard the stories. Everyone did. The rumors were always the same. Something happened there years ago, something bad enough to close the school for good. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered about a teacher who went insane, locking herself inside one of the classrooms. No one ever gave me details, though. It was all just fragments of a story passed around like a game of telephone, growing darker with every retelling. I never believed it. Why would I? Ghost stories are for scaring kids, not grown adults. But last week, everything changed. It was late, around midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I was just lying in bed, staring out my window when I noticed it. There, through the trees and across the street, was the school, and one of the upstairs windows was glowing. At first, I thought I imagined it, maybe headlights from a passing car or the moon reflecting off the glass. But no. The light was real, and it was on. A faint, yellow glow spilling out of the window, like it was coming from inside the building. My stomach twisted. That place hadn't had power for decades. I tried to ignore it. Maybe some kids broke in, maybe it was just a trick of the eye. But then the next night, the same thing happened. Same window, same light, same time, midnight. I don't scare easily, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For years, the school sat there, dark and forgotten, and now, for some reason, the lights were back on. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but I also knew I couldn't just look away. I had to find out what was happening. I couldn't stop thinking about those lights. Even during the day, when the school looked like it always did, empty, harmless, rotting, I couldn't get that image out of my head. That soft yellow glow coming from the second floor, like it had no business being there. It wasn't right. That school has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. I never went inside, but it was always there, sitting at the edge of the block, like an unwanted memory. Just this hollow, broken place. The gates were rusted shut, the windows jagged and broken, like the building was too angry to die. Nobody went near it, not even the troublemakers. It was like we all silently agreed, don't mess with the school. Growing up, I heard the stories, everyone did. Some said there was a fire, others said a gas leak, and a few even swore there was a teacher who went nuts one day and locked herself inside a classroom with a group of kids. That one always gave me chills. They said when someone finally busted the door open, she was gone. The kids were gone. Nothing was left but toppled chairs and weird scribbles on the blackboard, like someone had been in a hurry to leave a message that no one understood. I always thought those stories were just local legends, dumb things adults told kids to keep them away from an unsafe, crumbling building, and it worked. Even when I was a teenager, I'd ride my bike faster when I passed the place just to avoid looking at it too long. But now the lights were back on. It started 3 nights ago. I was up late, scrolling my phone in bed, when I looked out the window and saw it. A faint yellow glow coming from one of the upstairs rooms. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe headlights, maybe the moon. But when I stared long enough, I realized it was inside the school. The next night, I watched for it. Midnight hit, and there it was again. Same window, same eerie glow, like the building had suddenly decided it wasn't finished being noticed. I told myself it had to be a prank. Maybe some teenagers broke in with a flashlight or a generator. But then, as I stared at that window, I saw something move. It wasn't much, just a flicker of darkness passing across the light. But it was enough to make my heart drop. By the 3rd night, I was losing sleep over it. I didn't tell anyone because, honestly, who was going to believe me? Hey, I think the haunted school down the street has its lights on and, oh, maybe there's a shadow person in there. Yeah, sure, but the lights weren't going away. I'd watch them turn on at exactly midnight, glowing steadily for about an hour before they vanished, like nothing happened. Every time it happened, I felt like the school was daring me to notice it. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But there's something about seeing something unexplainable with your own eyes. It doesn't let you go. It sticks with you, gnawing at the back of your brain. I remember standing at my window that third night, my hands on the sill, staring at the school like it might stare back. I kept telling myself to let it go. I'd say, "It's nothing. You're overthinking. Just go to bed." But then that light would flicker, and every nerve in my body told me I was wrong. I didn't want to be the guy who went poking around where he didn't belong. You know the one. The idiot in horror movies who ignores every warning sign. But I also couldn't pretend nothing was happening. That's the thing. When you see something you can't explain, you start asking yourself the what ifs. What if I'm not imagining it? What if something is actually in there? What if I'm supposed to do something about it? By the fourth night, I snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and my phone, threw on a sweatshirt, and stood in front of the mirror like an idiot, staring at myself and asking, "What are you doing?" But I already knew. The truth was, I had to know. I couldn't sit in my room staring at that light for another night, wondering if I was losing my mind. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, peek inside, and then leave. That's it. I slipped out of the house quietly, keys in my pocket and my flashlight gripped so tight my hand hurt. I didn't have a plan, but I didn't care. The school was waiting for me at the end of the block, looming in the dark like it was holding its breath. It looked different at night, bigger, like the darkness itself was holding it together. The window, the one that glowed every night, was dark now, as if it knew I was coming. I stopped at the rusted gate, staring up at the building. My gut twisted, and a small voice in the back of my head whispered, "Turn around. Go home." But I didn't. I couldn't. I stepped through the broken gate and onto the overgrown path leading to the front doors, my flashlight cutting a shaky beam through the dark. My heart was pounding so loud I swear I could hear it echoing off the walls. I told myself it was just an old building, just bricks and wood, nothing more. But I knew deep down that I was wrong. Something was waiting for me inside. And I was about to find out what. I don't know what I was expecting when I left my house that night, maybe to prove myself wrong, that I'd been imagining it or that it was just some kids messing around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about those lights. So when midnight hit, I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my sneakers, and quietly stepped outside. The air was heavy, the way it gets late at night when the world feels unnaturally quiet. No cars, no dogs barking, just the distant hum of streetlights and the sound of my own footsteps. I felt ridiculous. I mean, I was heading toward the one place everyone in this neighborhood avoided like the plague, the old school. It looked worse up close, even in the dim light. The gates were rusted through, hanging like broken limbs. The front yard, if you could call it that, was just overgrown weeds and cracks where the earth had swallowed up the pavement. My flashlight beam flickered over the broken windows and graffiti-stained walls. I didn't want to read the words spray-painted there, phrases like "she's still here" and "don't stay after dark." The front door hung slightly open, creaking softly as the wind nudged it. My stomach dropped. It looked like the building was waiting for me. I paused at the entrance. There's something about walking into a place like that, like crossing a line you can't uncross. I could have turned around right then. I thought about it, but instead, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The air was different in there. Heavy, stale, freezing cold, like the building itself had been holding its breath for years. My flashlight flickered over the hallway in front of me. peeling paint that hung in strips from the walls, broken glass scattered across the floor, and old lockers covered in rust. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't the normal kind of quiet either. It felt deliberate, like something was waiting for me to make a sound. I took a step forward and the floor creaked. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam jittering across the walls. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from somewhere ahead of me. I froze, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped when I did. I turned my head slowly, scanning the hallway behind me. Empty, just shadows stretching across the floor. It's just the building, I told myself. Old places make noise. But my feet didn't get the memo. They kept moving one shaky step at a time toward the faint glow I'd seen from outside. It was coming from a room at the end of the hallway. The light was strange, too warm, too golden, like someone had lit a candle. It didn't belong there. I don't know what I expected when I reached the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the soft light spilling out from the crack. The air felt heavier now, pressing against me like I was being warned not to go any further, but I pushed the door open anyway. The light disappeared the second I stepped inside. The room went pitch black, my flashlight beam the only thing keeping the darkness from swallowing me whole. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I swept the flashlight across the room, breathing hard. It was just an old classroom, or what was left of one. Desks sat in scattered piles, broken and tipped over. The chalkboard on the far wall was covered in faint smears, as though someone had tried to erase something but couldn't. My flashlight landed on a teacher's desk at the front of the room. On top of it sat an open notebook, its pages fluttering slightly even though there was no wind. I stepped closer, my shoes crunching on glass. The notebook's pages were blank, except for one line, scribbled in jagged handwriting. "Don't look at her." I stared at it, my brain struggling to catch up. "What?" I whispered, my voice sounding far too loud in the silence. Then I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, coming from somewhere behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned sharply, swinging my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing, just rows of desks and dark corners. But then something moved. It was quick, just a flicker of darkness in the far corner of the room, like someone slipping out through the door. My heart stopped. I wasn't alone. The fear hit me all at once, like ice running through my veins. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted out of that room, back into the hallway, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted. I didn't care about the noise or the footsteps echoing behind me. I just needed to get out. The front door slammed against the wall as I shoved through it and stumbled into the night. I bent over, gasping for breath, my legs shaking beneath me. The school loomed behind me, silent again, like nothing had happened. I turned to look back, half expecting to see something or someone standing in the doorway. But there was nothing. Just darkness. I walked home in a daze, flashlight still clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just sat by my window, staring at the school across the street, waiting. At exactly midnight, the light came back on. This time, though, I saw something different. A figure, silhouetted in the window, standing perfectly still as though it was looking straight at me. I closed the curtains and didn't open them again until morning. Something's in that school. I don't know what it is, but it's not supposed to be there. And the worst part, I think it knows I've seen it. I barely slept the night after my first visit to the school. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that notebook, those words. "Don't look at her." The sound of whispers echoed in my ears and the figure in the window haunted me. By morning, I felt like a zombie, pacing back and forth in my living room. The logical part of my brain kept telling me it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the shadows, the noises. It was all just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. But the other part of me, the one that couldn't stop thinking about that light, knew better. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. So that afternoon, I drove over to my friend Eric's place. Eric had always been the guy you went to when you wanted the real story about something. Local legends, weird happenings, he knew them all. We sat on his porch while I spilled everything, the lights, the shadow, the notebook, the whispers. When I finished, Eric didn't laugh, he didn't call me crazy. Instead, he went quiet, his eyes narrowing like he was trying to decide how much to say. "I'm telling you, Eric, I'm not making this up," I said, desperate for some kind of explanation. He sighed. "I believe you, man. You're not the first to see it." "What?" I froze. Eric leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "The lights, the noises. That school's been like that for decades. My uncle told me stories about it when I was a kid. Said people used to see weird stuff there all the time, especially at night. But no one ever figured out why. It's like the place wants to be forgotten, but it won't let itself." I swallowed hard. "And what did your uncle say?" Eric looked me straight in the eye. He said, "If you ever see the lights, you leave them alone. Don't go back. Don't look for answers. Whatever's in there doesn't want to be disturbed." His words lingered with me long after I left his house. I wanted to listen. I wanted to forget about the school and move on with my life. But I couldn't. I'd seen too much. It felt like the place had its claws in me, tugging me back every time I tried to look away. By the 5th night, I gave in. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on a jacket, and left my house without a second thought. I was done sitting around waiting for answers. I had to see what was inside that building. The night air was colder than before, and everything felt wrong, too still, too quiet. The school looked like it had grown even bigger in the dark, like it was swelling out of the earth, swallowing up everything around it. And there it was again, that faint yellow light glowing softly from the 2nd floor. I stepped through the broken gate, crunching over gravel, and pushed the front door open. The air inside hit me like a wall, cold, damp, and stale. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but only barely. I started on the 2nd floor this time. My footsteps echoed as I climbed the stairs, each creak vibrating through the silence. The hall was darker than I remembered, and colder too. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The first classroom I entered was a wreck, desks scattered like someone had thrown them, broken glass littering the floor. My flashlight caught something small near the back corner, half buried under debris. I stepped closer and stopped. It was a child's shoe, old, dirty, and out of place. My chest tightened as I stared at it. Something about it felt wrong, like it had been left there on purpose. I backed away and left the room. In the next classroom, the chalkboard was smeared with words. Most of them were illegible, like someone had frantically tried to erase them, but I could still make out faint letters. "Help us." I turned around quickly, swallowing hard. "Nope, not reading that," I whispered to myself. The hum started when I reached the far end of the hall, faint at first, like the sound of a distant engine or machinery running somewhere below. I stopped to listen, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. The sound seemed to come from under the floor. I followed it down the stairs, back to the 1st floor, until I found the source. At the very end of the hallway was a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a pile of broken desks. The hum was louder here, vibrating faintly through the door. It was the basement. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. I knew I should turn around. Whatever Eric had warned me about, it was waiting for me on the other side, but I couldn't stop myself. I pushed the door open and descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement air was worse, stale, heavy, and damp. The steps groaned beneath my weight, and the hum got louder, filling my ears until it was all I could hear. When I reached the bottom, my flashlight revealed the massive space in front of me. The basement was huge. Rows of old lockers lined the walls, their doors rusted and hanging open. Piles of broken furniture were shoved into the corners like someone had tried to bury the past. My flashlight flicked over strange details. An old school bag, a crumpled test paper with no name, a clock on the wall stopped at exactly midnight. The hum stopped. Everything went silent, like the air itself had frozen. I stood there, flashlight shaking, straining to listen. Then I heard it. Soft, shuffling footsteps coming from the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. I turned, the beam of my flashlight darting toward the staircase. The steps were empty, but the sound was still there, coming closer, like someone, or something, was just out of sight. Then, slam. A door upstairs slammed so hard, it echoed through the entire building. The sound shot through me like a gunshot. My flashlight flickered as I spun around, scanning the basement, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't alone. I bolted. I ran up the basement stairs so fast I nearly tripped, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted toward the front door. The hall seemed endless, stretching on forever as my footsteps pounded against the floor. I burst through the entrance and into the cold night air, stumbling to a stop on the pavement. My chest heaved as I gasped for breath, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. I turned to look back at the school, expecting to see someone in the doorway, but it was empty, silent, like nothing had happened. Then I looked up. The second-floor window was glowing again, the same faint yellow light, and standing there, perfectly still, was a figure, a silhouette of someone watching me. I didn't stick around to look any longer. I turned and ran all the way home, locking the door behind me as if that would help. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, the hum still echoing in my ears. The image of that figure burned into my mind. Whatever's in that school, it doesn't want to be ignored. And now I think it knows I won't leave it alone. By the third night, I felt like I was coming apart. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think straight. The faint hum, the whispers, the shadows, none of it would leave me. The school had taken root in my brain like some kind of infection, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it kept pulling me back. I told myself it would be the last time, one final trip, one last look to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I'd record everything, write it all down. I'd have evidence. I could come home, say I figured it out, and maybe I'd finally be able to sleep again. At midnight, I grabbed my flashlight, my notebook, and my phone. My plan was simple. Get in, document everything, and get out. I didn't tell anyone this time. I didn't want Eric's warnings in my head, telling me to stay away. Deep down, I already knew I was making a mistake, but I didn't care. I had to go back. The night air was colder than before. My breath misted in front of me as I walked, the school looming in the distance like some kind of monster waiting for me. The second-floor window was glowing again, the light steady and soft, almost calm. I didn't feel calm, though. I slipped through the broken gate, the gravel crunching under my feet. The front doors were open, just like the night before, creaking softly as I pushed them wider. I stepped inside and froze. The lights turned on. Every single bulb in the hallway flickered to life, buzzing like angry bees. The glow was wrong, yellow, sickly, casting strange shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking at them. The air felt charged, vibrating faintly against my skin, like the building itself was alive. I pulled out my phone and hit record, the camera shaking in my hand as I whispered, "Okay, I'm here." I started walking. The lights seemed to lead me forward, flickering softly ahead of me as though they wanted me to follow. I moved cautiously, the hum growing louder with each step, a low vibration I could feel in my chest. I passed classrooms I'd seen before, broken desks, shattered windows, graffiti, but something had changed. The first room I entered had an old notebook sitting open on the teacher's desk. My flashlight beam caught the words scrawled across the page in a shaky, frantic hand. "She's waiting. I stepped back, my throat tight. I turned and moved quickly down the hall, my footsteps echoing far too loudly in the silence. I could feel it now, that sense of being watched. I'd shine my flashlight over my shoulder every few steps, convinced I'd see someone standing there. But there was nothing. Just empty hallways and shadows pooling in the corners. The hum seemed to come from deeper inside the building, pulling me toward it. I reached the basement door, still wide open, and just stared at it for a moment. My body screamed at me to turn around, to go home and forget this ever happened. But I couldn't. It was like the school was pulling me forward. I started down the stairs. The basement was worse than I remembered, colder, darker. The smell hit me immediately, a metallic, sour scent that turned my stomach. My flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping over rusted lockers, piles of broken furniture, and strange objects scattered across the floor. And then I heard them, whispers. At first they were soft, almost distant, like a breeze blowing through cracks in the walls. But the longer I stood there, the louder they grew, multiple voices overlapping, saying things I couldn't quite make out. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, shining the flashlight into every corner. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking. The whispers stopped. The hum cut out completely, and for a second there was nothing but dead silence. Then, from behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I turned quickly, the flashlight beam darting across the room, but there was no one there. My breath was coming out in shaky gasps as I backed toward the stairs, ready to run. The lights in the basement started to flicker, slowly at first, then violently, like they were about to burn out. The hum came back, deeper this time, vibrating through the walls and into my bones. My flashlight blinked out, and then I saw them. Figures. They stood at the far end of the basement, their shapes blurred, their edges too dark to make sense of. They didn't move at first, just stood there watching me. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I fumbled for my phone, but my hands were shaking too hard to grab it. The whispers came back, louder now, filling every inch of the space. The figures started moving, slowly at first, but with each flicker of the lights they came closer. I couldn't breathe. I turned and bolted for the stairs, my feet slipping on the concrete as I ran. I hit the basement door and yanked on the handle. It wouldn't open. I pulled harder, throwing my weight against the door, screaming now, "Let me out! Please, let me out!" The whispers were deafening, swirling around me like a storm. I turned my head and saw them, right there, so close I could feel the air turn ice cold. In the middle of them stood her. She was clearer than the others, though still distorted, like looking at someone through fogged glass. Her head tilted slowly, her body unmoving as she watched me. My chest tightened with a feeling I can't explain. It wasn't just fear, it was like she knew me. The lights flared so bright I had to squeeze my eyes shut, and when I opened them, everything went dark. Suddenly the door gave way, and I fell forward onto the hallway floor. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, my flashlight back on and flickering in my hand. I turned toward the basement door, half expecting to see the figures coming after me, but it was just closed. The school was silent again. I didn't stick around. I sprinted down the hallway and out the front door, stumbling into the cold night air. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. My legs felt like they might give out. I turned to look back at the building, expecting it to be dark, but the second-floor window was glowing again. And there, silhouetted in the light, was the same figure. She didn't move, didn't wave. She just watched me. I ran all the way home, slammed the door behind me, and locked every bolt and latch. I sat on my bed, still shaking, the events replaying in my mind, the whispers, the figures, her. I don't know what I saw in that school, but it wasn't human. And the worst part? I can't shake the feeling that it isn't finished with me. The lights are still coming on at midnight. every night, without fail, and I don't think they'll stop. I don't remember hitting the floor. One moment, I was yanking on the basement door, screaming for it to open, and the next, I was on my knees. My flashlight clattered away, its beam spinning wildly across the walls before settling into an eerie stillness. The whispers were everywhere, echoing inside my head, growing louder, closer, until they were all I could hear. Then, like someone had flipped a switch, everything stopped. The whispers, the hum, the flickering lights. Silence. I sat there for a moment, frozen. My chest heaved, each breath sharp and ragged, like I'd been drowning and had only just come up for air. I was too afraid to move, too afraid to make a sound. The silence wasn't comforting. It was waiting. I could feel it pressing in on me, thick and suffocating, like the entire building was holding its breath. I forced myself to sit up, reaching for my flashlight. It was weak, flickering, barely holding on. The beam wavered across the basement, and that's when I saw it, something pinned to the far wall. It was an old newspaper, yellowed and torn at the edges. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was the only thing my flashlight seemed to find. My legs shook as I stumbled over to it, every step feeling heavier than the last. The closer I got, the more the silence seemed to grow, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I shined my light over the brittle paper, and my stomach dropped. The headline read, "Local school shuts down after tragedy. Teacher and students disappear without a trace." I blinked, my heart pounding as I scanned the rest of the article. The words were faded, barely readable, but I could make out enough to piece it together. The school had been closed decades ago after some kind of incident. A teacher, Mrs. Hale, had snapped, according to witnesses. Students had gone missing. No bodies were ever found. And Mrs. Hale, she vanished too, gone without a trace. Parents demanded answers, but the investigation went nowhere. The school was shut down, and eventually the town moved on, or at least they tried. My flashlight flickered, and my eyes landed on one final line near the bottom of the article. Locals report strange lights and shadows in the building at night, believed to be echoes of the tragedy that unfolded there. Mrs. Hale's spirit is said to wander the halls, reliving her final moments. I felt my throat tighten as the pieces clicked into place. The lights, the whispers, the shadows. The figures I'd seen weren't just shadows. They were students, the ones who never left. And the light, the faint, sickly glow. It wasn't random. It was her, Mrs. Hale. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over debris on the floor. The flashlight trembled in my grip, and that's when I heard it. A door creaked. The sound was slow, deliberate, and it echoed through the silence like a warning. My head snapped toward the basement stairs, and I saw it, the door at the top of the steps inching open as though something was pulling it from the other side. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as the basement lights flickered back to life, one by one, buzzing and glowing that sickly yellow again. My flashlight sputtered out, leaving me standing there in the glow of those unnatural lights. And then the hum came back. It started as a low vibration, barely noticeable, but it grew quickly, louder and deeper, shaking the walls, the floor, my bones. The whispers followed, soft at first, but building into a frantic chorus of voices that surrounded me. I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. The basement was changing, shadows in the corners shifting, stretching, rising. I saw them again. Dozens of them. Shapes that looked almost human but weren't. They crowded the edges of the room, blurred and dark, like smoke given form. And then, in the center of it all, she appeared. Mrs. Hale. She was clearer than the others, though still distorted, like someone half erased from a photograph. She stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, her arms hanging at her sides. She was watching me. I couldn't see her face. It was too blurred, too wrong, but I felt her eyes, like they were digging into me. The whispers grew deafening. The lights above me flickered faster and faster, buzzing like they might explode. "Let me out!" I gasped, turning and throwing myself at the basement stairs. My hands grabbed the railing, pulling me up, my feet stumbling over themselves as I tried to climb. The whispers followed, louder and closer, the shadows at my heels. The basement door slammed shut as I reached it. I grabbed the handle and yanked, my voice cracking as I screamed, "Open! Please, open!" For a second, nothing happened. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel her, Mrs. Hale, standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching, waiting. And then the door gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath, but I didn't stop. I sprinted toward the front entrance, the sound of my footsteps echoing behind me, followed by the hum, the whispers, and the sound of something moving in the dark. The lights in the hallway flared violently, buzzing like a hive of angry bees. I threw myself at the front doors, hitting them with my shoulder until they burst open, and I staggered into the cold night air. The silence outside hit me like a punch to the chest. The hum was gone, the whispers had stopped. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. I turned back to the school, gasping, my hands on my knees as I tried to pull myself together. For a moment, it looked like nothing had happened. The building was still quiet, just as it always was. Then I looked up. The second-floor window glowed faintly, that same sickly yellow light. And standing in the light was her silhouette, Mrs. Hale. She didn't move, didn't wave, she just stood there staring at me. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and stumbled home, locking every door and window behind me, as if that could keep her out. I sat on my bed, shaking, my mind replaying every moment. The shadows, the whispers, the newspaper. The school wasn't empty. It wasn't forgotten. It was alive. That night, I didn't sleep. Even as I sat in the safety of my room, I could still feel her watching me. I didn't look out the window at midnight. I couldn't. But I didn't need to. I knew the lights would come back. And now, I know they always will. It's been a week since I stepped foot in that school, and I haven't been the same since. I've tried everything to get it out of my head. Work, errands, mindless scrolling on my phone. But it's always there, waiting for me the second I slow down. The hum, the whispers, her. I haven't told anyone, not really. What would I even say? Hey, I think there's something alive in the abandoned school and I saw it. It sounds insane. I almost called Eric, but what's the point? He warned me not to go back and I did anyway, and now I can't shake the feeling that I've brought something back with me. I don't look at the school anymore. My curtains stay shut at night, locked tight like they're supposed to keep her out. But it doesn't matter. I don't need to see it to know the lights are still coming on. Midnight, every night. I feel it in the pit of my stomach, like a thread tugging at me to look, to notice. And I'm terrified that if I do, I'll see her again. The weirdest part is that other people are starting to notice too. I heard Mrs. Lane next door complaining the other day. She said her dog keeps barking at the school at night and that she's seen flashes of light through the windows. Teenagers messing around, she muttered. I didn't say a word. I just nodded. Because what am I supposed to tell her? The other night, I made the mistake of glancing at it. I was taking out the trash and I looked just for a second. It was dark and still like it always is, but I felt it, that feeling you get when someone's watching you. My skin went cold, and I swear for a second I thought I saw movement in one of the second-floor windows. I ran back inside and locked the door behind me. I don't take the trash out at night anymore. No matter what I do, I can't forget what happened in that basement. The way the shadows moved, the whispers rising like a storm, the feeling of her eyes on me. I didn't see her face, thank God, but I knew she was looking right at me, like she knew me, like she'd been waiting for me. I think about that old newspaper clipping all the time now. Mrs. Hale, the teacher who disappeared, the kids who were never found. I keep wondering if the lights are her reliving those moments, trapped in that place forever. Or maybe she isn't trapped at all. Maybe she's still looking for something, or someone. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about what would have happened if I'd stayed longer, if I hadn't run, if I'd turned back to face her one last time. Would I still be here, sitting safely in my room? Or would I be part of that basement now, just another shadow lingering in the dark? I don't know, and I don't think I ever want to find out. All I know is that the school isn't empty. It never was. It's waiting, watching. For someone like me, someone who can't look away. The lights are still coming on every night at midnight, and sometimes, even with the curtains drawn and my back turned, I swear I can still feel her watching me. What would you have done in my place? Would you have gone back into that school? And what do you think really happened there? Let me know in the comments, if you dare. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And if you have your own terrifying story to tell, send it to me. Maybe yours will be next.